Hey everyone, happy Monday, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for our forward-looking webinar, The State of AI Marketing in 2025. So this is like a really exciting topic because there was a lot of activity in AI and marketing that happened in 2024, and all of that sets the foundation for what to expect in 2025. Now, after this discussion, we're going to have 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A, so be sure to pop your questions in the little widget below. And also, this event will be recorded, so we can email it out later today. All right, on with the show. I am Ryan Joe. I'm the editor-in-chief of ADWEEK, and I'm here with Distillery's chief data scientist, Melinda Han Williams. Melinda, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background with AI?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'm happy to be here. So I am the chief data scientist at Distillery. And Distillery is an AI ad targeting company. So we're using state-of-the-art AI and behavioral signals to reach the best audience for a campaign. And we're doing this both user-based segments and ID-free targeting, so you can reach that customer whether or not they're using third-party cookies or any other type of identifier. So we've been in the AI game a long time. And so with this perspective, we have a lot of experience, not just in using AI for marketing, but also in evaluating and incorporating new AI approaches as they become available, really throughout our business. So I'm hoping that for those who join today, regardless of where in the industry you sit, that this conversation will help you think about how to find those opportunities and how to evaluate opportunities to drive value using AI.
So when we think of AI in advertising today, we typically think of generative AI and LLMs, and there's an extent to which those are used interchangeably. Just really quickly, what's the difference?
Yeah, so LLMs stands for large language model, and you can think of it as kind of the language understanding that is the foundation to another layer, this generative AI layer that can literally generate text. And so that's what you're used to if you talk with ChatGPT or something like that, where there's a chatbot, it's actually generating text. There's also generative AI that's generating other mediums beside text, generating images or music, anything like that. And so the LLM just means it's about language, and generative AI means it's generating something new.
Great. So when we look back at 2024, which isn't over but will be soon, where has AI really kind of added the most value? And corollary to that, where has it failed the most? Let's start with the successes.
Yeah, and I think you can think of kind of within an advertising context these sort of categories where we're really seeing value. Creative is a place where honestly I'm more of an observer. I won't say too much, but I think that generating creative is like one of the first areas that really lit up in terms of generative AI applications in advertising. And I think there's a lot more to come here as that technology improves. Planning, there's been a decent amount of activity in this space, and here again, I think we'll see more. I think there's a lot more opportunity. So this means like choosing which channels and which formats to run, which audiences to target, and then potentially even how to allocate budget between them. Targeting is interesting because I think this is the area of advertising where AI really has the longest history. So this newest generation of AI, AI is nothing new to targeting, but this latest type of AI has brought new advances to AI and targeting, not just because of the ability to use those language-related signals, those LLMs, in more sophisticated ways, but also because of the ability to apply those same newer AI methods to non-language data, to the behavioral data. I think with targeting, effective advertising, it's fundamentally about understanding and influencing behavior, right? So when the latest AI approaches are applied to behavioral signals about the inventory or about the users, that type of application can really boost an advertiser's ability to deliver their message to a receptive audience. And then the last bullet point here, operations. I think this is important to call out because this is really not specific to marketing at all, but just this is everybody throughout the company just like doing their day-to-day tasks more efficiently. And I actually think this area has really enormous unrealized potential at most companies, just because there are just so many thousands of little tasks that actually need to be discovered and surfaced by the actual people doing them. So it's not something you can really bring to a company top down. And that just takes longer to sort of find and discover all those opportunities.
Well, I mean, you can't have successes without learning from the failures. So where has it really failed the most in 2024?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the biggest failures of generative AI in general, I think, come from hallucinations. And that's kind of what I think the first thing now we're all used to thinking about the problems with generative AI. And I think a lot of that has to do with what happens when you use these tools sort of like outside of the data that they know about. And so they're, all it can do is make stuff up. And I think honestly, this is a bit different than a bad looking failure, but I think that because of this, it's a lot of these applications have been underutilized. People maybe tried ChatGPT once when it first came out 2 years ago now, saw that it wasn't giving them what they wanted and haven't gone back to see where else they can get value if they're actually aware of missteps like hallucinations.
It feels kind of like the same old problem of like, garbage in, garbage out type of situation. Like, how do you know if you actually have enough of your data in the model so that it actually does what you want it to do? And then also, how do you know if your data is going to be secure?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, in terms of figuring out whether something has enough of your data or is pointed directly enough at your data, one way is literally just to play with it. So if you're using something that is in a chatbot format, you can kind of explore and try and get it to tell you things, either that it should know or it shouldn't know. Something that I think is a really good example of this is in the, on Amazon, when you're looking at like product reviews, they now have a little AI chatbot in there to help you parse all the product reviews. In the early days of that, you could ask it, like, tell me the first 3 sentences of the Gettysburg Address, and it would just tell you. So that kind of thing, you ask it, where do I get a good bagel in New York? If it has an answer, that means it's not directed at the reviews for the products that you're seeking. It can like pull any information anywhere, and so you don't know that it's focused on just your data. And then same thing goes for trying to like ask it things that it should know, data that you've given it, and see if it'll give you those answers. Ryan, I think there was another part to your question.
The security issue. So I'm, obviously I'm using it for my business applications. I'm putting in my business data in there. How do I make sure it's secure? I mean, is that my problem or is that my legal team's problem?
Yeah, that is a super important question. And that's something that we talk about when we've been launching AI applications like within Distillery. We've been talking about like assume that anything for a normal, just like publicly available, like normal sign up for one of these chatbots if you don't know anything else, just assume that anything you type in there is going to be just like on social media everywhere. Assume that it's going to go everywhere, and assume that everything it's telling you might be garbage. And then once we have that baseline, then what we did is we went deeper into the privacy policies. We got the legal team involved, and we got, found for specific products with the right level of signups, what are the security measures around that specific product. But you do have to actually do that homework before you can tell people in your organization it's fine to put actually sensitive information in there.
Can I just ask, how long did it take for you guys to do that homework? And then when were you like, okay, was there a point where you're like, I now feel comfortable?
Yeah, it took us a couple weeks of digging, and then it just moved our comfort line up. So initially it was like, yes, we can use internal documentation in this specific platform that we're signed up for in a specific way, but still don't put in social security numbers and credit card information. Like there was sort of a line of like how sensitive we could go. And so we're always kind of, continuing to do that digging before we add a new type of information to the bucket of what's allowed.
And then finally, just in terms of ensuring the safety of the data you put in, were there questions that you needed to have answered before you were like comfortable with the platform that you were using?
There were questions, but I will tell you, they are not questions. Again, this was one of the send it to the legal team, send it to the InfoSec team. And so they went through their own security requirements that they have for, all this kind of InfoSec process and went through the specific questions. So I'm not the person to clue you in on the details there, which is probably better if I'm not giving legal advice.
All right. We won't ask you for that then. So, all of that, those questions of data security aside, what should advertisers do to maximize their chances of success when it comes to AI?
Yeah. So, I mean, on the slide here, we're looking at just kind of some dimensions to think about. Like, what are some main things to think about? There's one thing, first we can think about optimization versus innovation. And this isn't like a necessary question for something to be successful. Like, it can be successful whether or not you're speeding something up, whether or not you're speeding something up so much that you actually are taking on a task that you never would have dared to do otherwise, or if you're doing something fundamentally different that humans would never have been able to do before. I think it's just.
I think a good example of that was like the Coca-Cola AI ad recently, where I think they used AI to send iterations to the client like daily instead of weekly. So that sort of just comes to mind.
Yeah, and I love that because it's like speeding something up doesn't just mean like making one person's job easier. It can mean you speed something up so much that it's actually makes something possible that was not previously possible, right? I think that's a great example.
Okay, and let's talk about like just how you're breaking down AI applications in advertising. How does that, there's a bunch of different sort of functions. How are you really thinking about it?
Yeah, so I think a really useful dimension for us has been to think about what does the AI know? So, if you open up ChatGPT and start talking to it, it knows the generally available information that's on the internet, which is a lot of information. But I think that an AI solution will always be more powerful when it has access to data that is really specific to the actual task that you want to accomplish. So whether that is going to be internal documents about your business that you upload to it, or data about how your customers interact with the brand, or those behavioral signals about the people that you want to reach, or the ad inventory where you might reach your next future customer. Like, whatever the case is, the more you can provide the AI with specific information about your actual problem, that's when these solutions are going to get really powerful.
So how do you, I guess, from a tactical standpoint, like how do you do that? You basically kind of just reach into your own knowledge of your customers and just import it into the AI, or, is this a situation where if you don't have that data, like, is there a way to kind of come up with it?
Yeah. So there's different versions of that. And I think all of this applies sort of, whether you're creating your own solution, whether you're looking for a solution that you're going to use, an external solution. And so like from tasks that are just sort of like language generation tasks, like this is what something like a ChatGPT, or a Gemini or a Claude is going to be really good at, even without adding extra information, whether it's writing English or writing code, it's going to be able to help you with that. But where it really levels up is something where you can also point it at data that's relevant to your task. So when we're talking about language, I think a good example of this is Google's Notebook LM. You can upload just like tons of documents. You can upload like all of your personal notes on something, or all of your company's documentation on something. And it's a really useful way to use LLM and generative AI to go through like specific information and extract exactly what you're looking for. But then you can go to the next. Sorry, go ahead.
What are the best practices around that, though? because, you still need to vet it. And also sometimes if maybe the AI isn't giving you the data that you want, or, there could be a scenario where it's causing more problems than really helping.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And I think that some of these tools like Notebook LM, one of the reasons I like it is when it finds information, it directs you to exactly where it found that information from. So that kind of helps you use it not to do your thinking for you, but as a tool to just surface the things you want to look at. With something like writing, whether it's writing a blog post or writing code, I definitely think that for people who are very good at their craft already, they just end up spending more time troubleshooting what it produced than what they created already. Especially at this stage, honestly, if you're not very good, it's very helpful. And that can be whether or not you're, working outside your language of expertise, like whether it's like spoken language or coding language, or like it's really good at translation. I think I got distracted from your question a little bit. You're talking about the problem of having to vet the output, which is definitely like a really important consideration, especially if the goal is to save time. You have to be really aware if you're spending more time vetting than you saved, or whether you are trying so much to save time that you skip the vetting step, and then you're really in trouble.
Cool. All right, and also I also wanted to get your take on like how you feel about synthetic data, because sometimes we were talking about like potentially finding audiences. Maybe you don't know the makeup of the audience that you want to target. Maybe you want to target a very specific type of audience, but you don't have the data on them. And synthetic data has sort of emerged as a means to target those audiences. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, synthetic data is coming up as a way to kind of understand something about something that you don't really have data on. I think with targeting, I think we're not really in a space where synthetic data is required, because there is so much data available that we can learn from, my preferred method is to understand from what the data we have and then apply it in the space we want to use it for. And I think I can talk about, in terms of thinking about what data you have and what data that the AI has access to. We talked about with language, and where giving it access data can mean literally uploading documents to it. You can also think about taking your AI system and actually integrating it into a system where it directly has access to the domain data. And so that can be really valuable when you're getting into something like audience planning. So an example from Distillery is we have something called Audience Brief Genius, where you can just paste in your full campaign brief, and then it finds from our public catalog of audiences the most relevant ones that fit to your campaign. And so this kind of integrated system, it just lets you go deeper than just chatting, and because it allows you to kind of actually calculate distances in a space that represents language and find the most applicable audiences in that way.
I've also seen like instances where AI can really help improve behavioral targeting. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So AI, of course, has been valuable in behavioral targeting for a long time. But I think that when we think about the idea of, I was talking about taking AI and integrating it into a system with domain data, that can mean data, non-language data as well. So now we can move beyond specifically LLMs, and we can think about taking the latest types of AI and applying it to data that's not language data. And so an example I can give of that is from Distillery. It's something that we call the map of the internet. And so the way this works is similar to how you think about ChatGPT learns what a word means based on how it's used in a sentence. So with the map of the internet, we're learning about what a website visit means based on how it appears in real users' digital journeys. So this is data collected with opt-in panels that are outside the advertising ecosystem. And so what you get is this really rich understanding of what every website on the internet means. So that's literally a 128-dimensional map that captures all the different ways websites can be related to each other. And then this can really be used to power ad targeting. So it can work without any user and identifiers, just by understanding this level of detail about one inventory moment. Or you can use this to help understand a user's full digital journey if you're doing user-based segments and you want to understand behavior in that way. But in terms of how AI can be used for targeted advertising, like in 2025 and beyond, I think this is a really important example, because we tend to think of AI as being very data hungry. And for behavioral approaches in particular, you might think of AI approaches as being kind of in conflict with user privacy. And so in this example, the AI is data hungry, but by pointing it at the right data so that we're actually learning about the inventory moment rather than learning, details about the specific user that we're targeting, it shows us that this is a thought, like in the right thoughtful use of AI, you can actually do more with less user data. And so I think it's a little bit counter to how we're used to thinking about AI for behavioral targeting.
So, I mean, it's more privacy safe to use AI for behavioral targeting. Is it like more precise as well?
It is surprisingly precise. And especially because you have this level of depth of what someone's intent is in this one moment. It's at the same moment when they're going to see the ad, because it's the inventory you're evaluating itself. So you can be really dead on in terms of their current mindset. And then you can bring in another layer to this, another piece of AI where you go in and predict the actual value of that moment to the user and bring in things like bid price. And you can really get super strong performance with this just surprisingly small amount of information, what that person is doing just at that moment, because of the way that we're allowing the AI to let us do more with less user data.
I think like with AI also, we're going to see the rise of AI generated content, the rise of MFA sites as well. So I guess as an advertiser, trying to find the best audience, how should we be thinking about that?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really big thing in the next year. MFA has been a really big topic in this last year, right? Made for advertising or made for arbitrage sites. And I think that AI makes it just that much easier to produce that kind of lower quality content at volume. And so we're really already seeing this. It's kind of MFA on steroids. And I've heard it called AI slop content, which I think is a good term. And so in a world where a lot of the available ad inventory out there is this AI slop, I think that behavioral targeting becomes even more important, because we need to understand not just what the page is about, like in terms of the words on the page, but we really need to understand how that fits into a user's journey and how this content is actually consumed, whether it's actually being used in a way that's relevant to the brand.
Are we kind of heading into a world where we're just going to need to have like an AI behavioral solution in order to just sort of combat the deluge of content that's out there, or that's going to just increase?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really does kind of become part of this arms race. You have AI generated content, so now you need AI behavioral targeting in order to find the right inventory from it within that mix. But I think it is the best way I can think of to solve that problem.
I'm glad you brought up the arms race, because there's so many AI tools that are available. So how should anyone just like keep up with all of them?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot out there, and I think you just have to get your hands dirty and test it and use it like for your specific approach. And I think that like it's like all solutions. The answer is always to get your hands in there and test and sort of like be deliberate, make sure you understand what your metrics of success are and like what you need to invest in order to see the right outcome. I think one aspect of this is that there's just so many options out there. I think it is a little bit hard to pick which one, but it helps to know exactly what you're looking for. And then I do think you just have to get your hands in there and start playing with it.
Do you have any idea on how to whittle down, like even if you know what you want, there are multiple vendors offer some sort of and say, yeah, we can help you with that. And you do a pilot with them. That takes time, that takes resources on your end to actually get up and running. And then, if it doesn't work out, then you kind of have to find another one. And it just, it feels like a very kind of tedious and slow process. Do you have any advice on how to kind of wend your way through all of that?
That's funny. I wonder if you could ask a generative AI to help you pick the right one of these. Because I do think that part of the problem is there's a lot of solutions out there, but I think part of the problem is also finding the problems that can be solved. I don't think those have all been identified yet. If you think about like your organization and all of the people that work there and all of the tasks that are happening, I don't think there are people working on and selling tools for each of those things. And so I think that part of the solution is just to get people throughout an organization thinking about where in their tasks, like where in their day-to-day, there is a problem that can be solved with AI, and just start trying, even kind of off the shelf versions. And then it gets much better when you're able to really identify what the problem is you want to solve, and you can employ like a more customized solution that's, again, like tied to the data that you're trying to use.
I'm glad you brought up the people, because change management is like a whole other topic. Dive into it, since it is crucial if you're going to bring AI into your organization. You mentioned getting your employees to think about where AI can really improve their processes. But I don't know, realistically, if I'm an employee, I just need to get to my job, to finish up my job. If I've been doing it the same way, like for 10 years, and you say, think about AI, I'm going to say, well, no, I'm fine the way I'm doing things. How do you kind of facilitate change?
I think that if a company is really serious about finding finding all the problems that can be solved with AI in their organization, they do need to kind of put in some work to facilitate that and incentivize that discovery. Something that we've done at Distillery, we're running a contest. This was something inspired by our CEO heard Ethan Mollick speak, who's a Wharton professor who has a lot to say about AI. And the idea is, because the problems are so distributed throughout everyone's day-to-day, you're never going to discover them all unless you actually incentivize all of those individuals to surface those problems and kind of start playing with solutions to them. So we've been running a quarterly contest where every quarter everyone submits their best ideas, a brief proof of concept for something that helps their day-to-day. And it's actually been incredible for surfacing problems and potential solutions for problems, like work that people are doing throughout the organization. And we actually have a lot of stuff working in production now that I'm pretty sure we never would have surfaced before if we weren't incentivizing everyone with this contest once a quarter.
What incentives do they get?
Money. There's a cash bonus every quarter.
Do you ever still run into employees who, age-old fear, I'm going to be replaced?
So, when we rolled out this contest, part of the deal was that this isn't to replace you. This is to make your job easier and make your job faster. I do think it's real though, right? It's going to change what jobs look like. It's going to change the profile of what jobs are needed and what the day-to-day of those jobs are like. So I think it's similar to every other piece of technology that's ever been rolled out. I'm glad I don't work in a typing pool, and that we've have the tools to make my day-to-day easier. But there is going to be change, and for some people, for not everyone, it's not going to be good for everyone, right? For some people, that change is going to be hard, and so I do think that's something that people have to look out for, how their role is going to change and how they can be prepared for that.
Great. Well, Melinda, I think we're kind of winding things down, but I think you have some takeaways that you wanted to go through before we dive into Q&A.
Yeah, I do have a few takeaways. And so the first is just that reminder to, when you're looking for AI applications, whether it's something you're going to build yourself or something you're going to bring into your company, really think about the applications that focus on task-specific data. So it can be like an LLM approach that lets you upload documents, or ad targeting approaches like Distillery's AI targeting that learns from the actual observed behavioral patterns of people who may have interacted with the brand or interacted with inventory. And then testing. I mean, we talked about this. It always just comes back to testing. So for testing any new approach, like if you're testing an AI targeting solution, my experience is that the brands and agencies that do this best are the ones that really do it deliberately, so that they're knowing in advance what they're going to look for and what they're measuring and how much they need to invest to really get a clear measurement. Of course, there's always going to be the problem, Brian, that you mentioned, that there's just like so many different solutions out there. But in order to understand any solution, you just have to test it and see how it works. And I do think that the other valuable thing to think about, the other side of that, is on the operations side, how to capture the potential of AI there. And so I think that it's the same idea. You got to just get your hands dirty. And I think one way to do that is any person can just in their day-to-day have a little bit of the discipline that have that ChatGPT window open, and anytime you get stuck, just try it and see what happens. Like you want to see something in Excel you don't know how to do, ask ChatGPT, and you might be surprised with a little practice that you get better at discovering these opportunities, or you start, naturally trying things that you never would have thought to even try before. And I said, so that's something I kind of encourage everyone to do. And so speaking of using, making an effort to use generative AI more often just to get a feel for it, I asked ChatGPT for a third takeaway on this slide, given the heading and the first two takeaways, and it suggested personalized prioritization while balancing privacy. Prioritize personalization while balancing privacy. So I think that's a great point. And something I want to further customize a little bit with the reminder that although AI certainly is data hungry, if used thoughtfully, it can actually let you do more with less data, less user data.
All right. Thanks, Melinda. Let's head over to the Q&A, and if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with an answer. So you will not be ignored. First question: what do you recommend as a process for checking accuracy and establishing quality score for the AI that a company will implement? Does the QC need require establishing a new team of experts to review flagged results?
That's a good question. I mean, the reason why I'm pausing is I'm trying to think of like, what AI process are we talking about? I really do think it's important to have a process to flag like questionable output of, if you're using literally generative AI to produce something that might be used in your business. That's something that we've talked a lot about internally as we use more solutions for internal problems. And so there is a lot you can do. I mean, you can do things, you can set up a process without bringing in new humans to do the review. Presumably their time is getting saved by doing this process, so we're freeing up some time to do human review. But you can set up a process where there's documentation around who approved something, so that it puts a little bit more onus on people to actually take the time to do the reviewing, because they know that they're going to be on the hook for the results. You can kind of separate the review from the person who is like in a hurry to get it done. There's a lot of processes like that you can get in place just to kind of make sure that things that need to be reviewed are reviewed, because it is important that like anytime you have just straight up output straight from the generative AI, I really do think it needs to go through some process, whether it's an automated process or a human process, but something needs to happen to make sure that that doesn't go straight out the door, because it will contain mistakes some of the time.
Next question. Will you expand more about how you can track user journeys without user data and increase privacy using AI?
Yeah, totally. So tracking user journeys. So the way we do this at Distillery is we use opted in panel data that is separate from the ad ecosystem. So it doesn't have to do with, the ad ecosystem. It's like a separate application or extension or something like that that someone has downloaded and opted into using, that will then collect their full URL history. So then we can take that and understand how those journeys work, understand what an inventory, what each website means in the context of that digital journey, so that later when we see that same piece of inventory without any user information, now we know that much more about it, and we understand how what it means when someone's visiting that inventory. So by using that separate data set from opted-in users to understand about the inventory itself, then we can later target that inventory without any information about the user in a really privacy-friendly way.
For both of us, what is the single best AI tool and use case that you found? It doesn't matter whether it's for business or for fun.
I will tell you, I'm going to decline on single best. That's a little too big for me. Or if I have to say single best, I'll say, Distillery's ID-free targeting. But the funnest thing that I found recently, I mentioned Notebook LM, and I've been playing with it recently, and it's pretty cool because you can put in just like a massive amount of information and have it create a podcast. And it's actually kind of engaging and comes up with new examples. So I put my PhD thesis in there, and it played back to me a 14-minute, like actually kind of interesting, entertaining podcast about what I studied all those years ago. And I think it's a really useful way to use that on really specific information with in a way that limits how much it can make up.
I will actually second Notebook LLM because a friend of mine she put scraps of her novel that was like a third written into it, and it came up with a podcast that if I didn't know it was AI generated, I wouldn't have known. I mean, it sounded really real, but it also started, she told me it just picked out themes that she wasn't aware of. And she was like, oh yeah, that actually is in my writing. So it actually did kind of help her in the process of creating it, reframe the way she was thinking it and think, okay, I should actually bring this out a lot more. So it changed the way she thought about her own work, even though she only fed scraps of it into the LLM.
That's totally impressive.
Okay, next question. I'm so curious about the incentive program. How do you vet and decide what to work on from the people presenting things to solve?
Oh, that piece of it has turned out to be the easiest because, so initially when we started running it, so we have a judging process to figure out who wins. So like everyone submits their submissions, the judging panel goes through it and then awards a winner. And at first the judges were like worried that by picking a winner, they were picking the one that we would like devote resources to develop. But in reality, there were so many good ideas, like more than one per quarter, that every quarter, like most of the ideas have ended up getting resources and getting attention. And so, I mean, sometimes before the judging is even done, we're passing these things around to the product team. They're figuring out how we can use this. And so it kind of very naturally, just by surfacing good ideas, they sort of very naturally go into this system where if they're useful enough, people want to use them, and it drives us to put in the resources to develop them further and bring them to production.
Next question. So loved your push to think of Gen AI as enabling you to do something that was not possible before, not just doing the same faster and cheaper. What's a good example of that potential?
I like your example of your friend with their novel, because it's like not just that they, like, because when I think about there's this line where it saves so much time that it's a thing you wouldn't have done before, right? Like pushing a new creative for Coca-Cola every single week. And I think that finding new themes in the notes for your novel is in that state where it's like just a little bit behind. No matter how much time you spent on that, it's like surfacing and synthesizing something new that you wouldn't have been able to find. I think that's a good example.
Got it. This one's for me. This is my first ADWEEK webinar, so Ryan, are you zooming in from an undisclosed bunker, an exotic wine cellar, a cave in Afghanistan? I am at the Madonna Inn in San Luis Obispo. They are not sponsoring this webinar.
Nice.
And each room is very unique and has a completely different theme. This is called the Caveman Room. And so the entire thing is rock. I was worried I wouldn't get a Wi-Fi signal, actually, but fortunately it works. And just as a example of how odd this place is, my bathroom sink is actually like, it's a waterfall. Like, that's not an exaggeration. There's no sink, it's just a waterfall. So yeah, so check it out. Not a plug.
I always heard about that place. I'm glad to get a little view of it.
Next question. What is a hallucination?
Oh, I'm sorry. A hallucination is what's kind of become the term for when generative AI says something that is made up. A famous example would be searching for how to make the cheese not slip off your pizza, and the generative AI says, just put in a little glue and it'll stick better. It's not like, not necessarily a good idea or true or correct, but it seemed like the right thing for the generative AI to spit out, so it did.
Great. All right. And next question. When using AI for understanding our data more critically, what biases do we as professionals have that might influence our interpretation of it? Overconfidence in AI is often compared to increasing the amount of needles in a haystack, but also increasing the mass of hay and fake needles, things we think are significant but are not. Is that a fair assessment?
That's an interesting idea. I mean, it reminds me of what I hear from software developers who are asked to use AI to help them write code, is like, yeah, it can write a lot of code really fast, but now I'm going to have to spend all of my time reviewing and fixing that code because it's wrong. I think that's we're definitely generating a lot of hay and needles. I do think something worth keeping in mind is it's only gonna get better. So I think this is a good tip for someone who tried ChatGPT when it first came out 2 years ago and wrote it off. Like every version of ChatGPT after that is going to be better. And so, you might keep checking in and seeing if it meets your use cases. By the way, this is also not a ChatGPT commercial. I keep using them as an example because they're like, kind of kicked off this whole thing in the public awareness, but still try it.
This is not a ChatGPT commercial. This is not a notebook commercial, and this is not a Madonna In commercial. Those are your final takeaways. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up, but thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun. I feel I've learned a lot. And to our listeners, I hope you guys have too. So thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Ryan.